Hey, and we're back with another episode of Go FUD Yourself. JD Gagnon here. As you can see, my normal co-host Kiara is away today, and we have what I believe to be a phenomenal guest in Mr. Dave Birch. How are you, sir?
You're very kind, JD. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be invited.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to have you here. Just for people that maybe aren't familiar with you or don't notice you in their list of people that they're following, either on LinkedIn or on Twitter, maybe you could give a couple-minute intro, who you are, what you do, and kind of where your areas of interest lie.
Sure. So for most of my life, I was a consultant working in Europe, US, Far East. Worked on a lot of stuff to do with secure communications. That took me into financial services. That took me into payments and money, which I became very fascinated by. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Identity is the New Money, which I flatter myself did okay. I've written a couple more books since then, and I'm still technically, I do a little bit of consulting, but I spend most of my time on my advisory board and board roles. And I write for Forbes.com and for Financial World. And that keeps me busy too.
Yeah, a lot of fun. What's the motivation for that? Is it your natural inquisitive nature that leads you to do that? Or are you interested?
I found that, taking things, Forbes, for example, is a very interesting discipline because you have to take a topic and you've got to boil it down so that a business reader can pick it up. They can read 700-800 words on their phone and come away understanding something more than they did before. And I actually quite like the challenge of that, of the discipline of that is very good. But I also liked writing, and I wanted to be a writer, and you can't make a living from being a writer, so you have to go out and pay the rent some other way, which I also do.
Make a living first, and then pursue your passion. That's amazing. I mean, for anybody that wants to check you out, obviously we'll post your LinkedIn websites, links to your books, all that stuff.
Thank you very much.
Producers will post that below, so we can give Dave some love. Everybody that's watching, a quick reminder: we're a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're only 30 minutes. Which you'll see today. We have to get through the major news items of the day in that 30 minutes. Please help us spread the word. We don't commercialize the podcast. So this is really just a service. It's my favorite thing to do. I think it's amazing, and it keeps me in tune with what's going on globally and impacting our space. But I think it's also a great service that we provide to our communities. And so like, share, subscribe, help us get that word out, help us with reach. It's ever important in social media and getting the word out. Okay, with that, we will play a quick video and we'll get right into it. All right, we are back. Okay, so first topic, and this is one that I think, Dave, you'll have some good thoughts on. So I want to make sure we have ample opportunity for you to give your insight, I suppose, here. But essentially, this is something that this is like a bit of an age-old debate. This has been going on since really, a long time. Privacy has been critically important to society for at least the last 100 years, but especially more so in the last few decades when, the internet was becoming more prevalent and the access to our private information. There's many, many more vectors now than there ever was before. So essentially what has kind of been going on over the weekend and at the end of last week, there's a lot of debates now in blockchain and crypto that are suggesting what's more important, consumer protection or privacy, or kind of where are we going with all of this? Before we get too deep into this article, from 10,000 foot view, Dave, kind of what's your position on privacy and how that impacts innovation? And then we'll dig into what they're saying in the article here a bit.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you picked 200 years ago as your boundary there, because obviously if you go back more than 200 years, we didn't have any privacy. It's not a natural condition. You know, we spent the first millennia of our existence as human beings with no privacy whatsoever. You know, either in the cave or, you know, in the medieval village or so on. So a lot of our thoughts about privacy are linked to what you might think of as the sort of bureaucratic response to 19th century industrialization and the urban anonymity that came from it. So we have to be very careful constructing the kind of privacy we want in the future. There is no model of privacy to go back to, if you see what I mean. We have to kind of build the privacy we need for the future. And I think one of the complexities in this debate is the constant confusion between privacy and anonymity. So most of us, I think, would want to live in a society where there is privacy. I don't think any of us really would want to live in a society where there's anonymity. If we allow, you know, to pick the obvious example, which would inflame the passions of the audience, if you allow unlimited anonymous electronic cash to flow around the globe, then you just turn society back over to warlords, and you reduce most of us to the status of cattle, which is actually what we had until the Industrial Revolution. So anonymity privileges the rich and the powerful, and in ways which would be very unpleasant. So what we want is privacy, and the question is, you know, what kind of privacy? What are the protections that go with that? And from my point of view, I'm very interested in the technological infrastructure that can, if you like, enforce that privacy rather than hoping that guidelines and so on will do it for us. So that's the overlap. And actually I'm quite optimistic about this, because I think a lot of the technologies which people see as coming out of crypto, you know, things like zero knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryption, cryptographic blinding, those are actually tried and tested cryptographic techniques. And as people begin to build more and more on top of those, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to build a privacy enhancing infrastructure.
So do you believe that there's a trade-off then in consumer protection and privacy?
No, I think we can have consumer protection and privacy. We can't have consumer protection and anonymity. Absolutely correct. But we can have consumer protection and privacy. Absolutely. In fact, it's not a trade-off. We should demand both of them. I mean, we live in a society. You know, we want consumers to be protected and we want privacy.
I think the debate in the crypto space, we talk about this actually quite a bit. And I've been quite vocal over the years that I just don't see a world where anonymity has a place. And I've been saying that for quite a while. And privacy, of course, is very important. But I think the conversation in crypto has been frequently conflating the two. This article, I believe, conflates the two, to your point.
Well, look, I think, you know, you have a situation where you have a kind of a maximalist position, which I think in some ways isn't terribly well thought through, but it becomes a kind of tenet. So people believe that if you don't have like absolute anonymity, then, you know, then we live in a state of tyranny and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, neither of the extremes are true. None of us want to live in a state of absolute anonymity. None of us want to live in a state of absolute, whatever the opposite of anonymity is.
Yeah.
You know, most people are in the middle somewhere, and it's a question of finding out what the parameters are. And by the way, I strongly feel people like me shouldn't be making those decisions, because those decisions about what that privacy should look like, those are decisions that should be formed by, you know, social anthropologists and economists and sociologists and psychologists. And, you know, it shouldn't be made up by tech guys and then foisted on everybody. That doesn't seem the right long-term solution to me. So, but I mean, the particular point they're talking about here is, you know, are they going to have, are stable coins going to have privacy? Answer probably yes. Is that the same as the sort of pseudo anonymity of Bitcoin? No, it isn't, but I'm not sure that's what we want.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I talk about this quite a bit. There's the sense of anonymity in crypto right now, but the actual capacity for anonymity is very slim, if not non-existent, in my opinion. To be able to function properly in this space, there's enough KYC gating throughout the process now that you can't do a heck of a lot without.
Well, also, it turns out that if you want complete privacy, having all the transactions recorded on an immutable public ledger is probably not the optimum strategy. Now, it's entirely possible to envisage coins or payment systems that are built on other cryptographic techniques which do deliver anonymity. But I don't think anybody actually wants this. They all sound good, like especially if you're like a undergraduate computer scientist. I mean, this sounds great.
Of course,
you're going to be in charge of until right up to that moment when grandma presses the wrong button in an email and now her house belongs to someone in Vladivostok and you can't get it back. It sounds good really just up until that point, and then
it's always like that though, right? Everything sounds great until you get burned, and then when you get burned you realize, crap, we probably should have wore gloves or something.
There's a great book I like very much. There's a book by Professor Edward Baliesin which is called The History of American Fraud. It's a wonderful book, but it does highlight there is and I can say this as an outsider, but there isn't a kind of an American exceptionalism around this. That sort of caveat emptor bullshit that you see propagated across pseudo-libertarian coin circles. There is something very American about this. It is linked to this kind of Wild West idea that if you can sell somebody the old horse because they didn't check the teeth properly, then good for you, basically. And I think that is a little different from other countries. I genuinely do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I remember when I was originally drawn to the space, and anybody that has been following us, I spent greater than a decade in traditional finance prior to this at a leading national firm in Canada. Anyways, all of that to say, I think that many people that came to the space came here because of some of these enticing features that in the end will not be that relevant. Privacy and anonymity, mainly anonymity being one of them. Everybody was drinking the Kool-Aid early on. Oh, screw the IRS, screw the government. We don't need to pay tax on this. We can just kind of do whatever we want. And it's self-sovereignty and yada, yada, blah, blah. Liberating financial.
I always thought it was because if you really want not to pay tax and not to have a government and to be, look after
yourself. To the third world.
Just go to Somalia. Why are you complaining about this? I mean, there are plenty of places where you can go and live like that. So, but as you said about being drawn to, I mean, I think the reason why people like me were drawn to it is because it is intellectually very interesting. It is a powerful body of work, which undoubtedly is going to change the way that finance works in the future. But
we're probably going to see.
If you really want to annoy them, it's just a little tip. But if you want to drop, if they're annoying you at a party or something like this, then just tell you think Bitcoin. It's kind of like COVID. It was like it's a lab experiment that just somehow escaped, and is causing havoc. But in the long run, it won't change anything.
Yeah, I mean. There's an interesting pendulum effect. We could probably talk about this forever, actually, for the whole podcast. It sounds like I've got some really interesting thoughts and questions on data sovereignty, and maybe I'll have you back for something like that one of these days, Dave. That'd be great.
Well, if that doesn't get you some comments on LinkedIn, I don't know what will. What do I have to do to get you cancelled? I don't even know.
It doesn't.
I've said enough.
I do quite a bit to get myself canceled. I'm surprised I'm still here, but we're doing okay. Anyways, okay, so we're going to move a little bit from kind of this privacy piece and move on to Congress a little bit. And so I have been a very staunch opposition to CBDCs and the digital US dollar and what that means for the space and privacy and data sovereignty and all of these things. I've been a fairly vocal critic, but I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are, maybe more broadly on CBDCs or central bank digital currencies, digitized fiat, managed by the government. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a big fan of CBDC. I think it's a really good idea. The digital dollar interests me especially because, for example, I can't remember where I read it now, but I read something the other day. There was a guy who posted, it was Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or something. he was sending some money to Argentina, which is an example beloved of Bitcoin maximalists. And the guy he was sending who had a Bitcoin wallet, but he didn't want Bitcoin. The guy said, "Can you send me Tether or Circle down there?" Which the guy did. And that kind of illustrated to me the underlying tension here, which is in many places that crypto maximalists hold up as examples of the power of cryptocurrency. What people actually want is dollars. And insofar as they use cryptocurrency as a way to get dollars. And I would go so far as to say, I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would go so far as to say probably more than half the population of the world, if given the completely free choice to hold whatever they wanted, would hold dollars. They have the liquidity, they have the international acceptance and so on.
Sure.
And, there's pretty substantial money stacking up in Tether and Circle already. So whatever you think about them, it doesn't matter. So why the Federal Reserve? And remember, every dollar bill, and I don't even know why we talk about dollar bills. There are more $100 bills in circulation than $1 bills, right? And 2/3 of all US currency is outside the country and unlikely to ever be repatriated.
I did not know that there was more hundreds than ones, because I surely don't have more hundreds than I have ones.
Of course you don't. They're all under mattresses in Central America. But the point is, those bills are an interest-free loan to Uncle Sam.
Right.
So why the US wouldn't want a digital dollar, I don't understand. If there was a digital dollar and people around the world started using it, that is a massive interest-free loan to Uncle Sam, and it would facilitate international commerce and trade. So I know there's a kind of, I mean, I do read about this stuff. So I know there are some people who think that a CBDC is in the chips that Bill Gates implanted in people during the pandemic, and that it's going to use the 5G towers to steal money from unvaccinated people and send it to Satan, I think. Or something. I mean, I may not have read the whole thing in detail, but you get the general points. So there is a fringe of that. But on a rational calculation, I don't understand why the US wouldn't want one. A federal US digital dollar would be held around the world.
Yeah. The way that I approach this, and it's interesting, I think we can have an interesting conversation here about this. Yeah. I think there's an important distinction between stable coins, US denominated stable coins, and central bank digital currencies, which is where I have my largest area of concern, to be politically correct. But I am 1,000% with you. I think stable coins are incredibly important. I think they'll facilitate global FX sooner than we know.
No, I'm with you on stable coins. It's just a question of, if you follow the sort of the general pattern of history, then what has happened time and time again is you've had private stable coins which will compete until you can't make any money on the margin anymore, because the competition will drive the margins down. Yeah. So eventually you get to a point where everybody's using them, but nobody can make money from them. In which case the state steps in and takes over. So
yeah,
given that we heard that song before, why don't you just make a Fed coin?
My concern with this is it's very much a slippery slope, in my opinion. And so, especially in the wake of COVID. Now, I'm known to wear a tin hat from time to time, but I'll try to take it off for the purpose of this conversation. But it is very much a slippery slope. And in the wake of COVID, when we saw what most people can understand to be somewhat of a power grab through the COVID process, I think. Yes, COVID was shitty for a lot of people, but I think the way that global governments used it as a means to further certain policy was alarming. All of that to say, I think CBDC from American government's perspective is amazing. It's perfect. It doesn't make, there's no logical reason why they wouldn't do that or wouldn't want to do that. I think from my perspective, it's more speaking to privacy and so on. I'm Canadian, so I lived in Canada at the very beginning of COVID before we moved here to the US. And one of the big things that was eye-opening for us was when the government blocked bank accounts to anybody that was even arm's length supporting, whether it's a family member or via your business or anything, supporting these trucking protests. And that was very alarming because
that had nothing to do with CBDC.
I'll get there. Just one sec.
Oh, okay.
So that they had, in order to facilitate that, they had to call a national emergency for COVID and do a whole bunch of things to kind of subvert the process in Canada. And the reason that this was problematic is because, given the opportunity to do something like that, it was political dissension that was like, these were the most nonviolent protests that have ever existed. Like, the biggest complaint about the protests was horns honking. Like, I mean, that's not that big of a deal. But they were locking people's bank accounts indefinitely. Anyways, the reason I use that example is, given the ability to oversee, to censor, to control, to block transactions in that way, there's always been separation between, at least theoretically, between the financial system and the federal government for that reason. And in this particular case, a CBDC would now be commingling of in a greater way than the current fiat reserve.
Well, that's a design choice. I mean, remind me never to use a CBDC designed by you would be my, if you think that commingling is a, no, I'm sorry. You're conflating two different things there. So you're saying that should we have a CBDC that works in a kind of crass and stupid way and inevitably will get abused? Well, the answer is probably not. No, I don't think we should. Should we have a CBDC from an American point of view? Should we have a CBDC that reinforces American soft power on a global basis? I think we should. Oh, well, I think you should, since I'm not American.
Yeah, I'm not American either. So,
but generally speaking, as a sort of citizen of the world, I prefer to see American soft power reinforced around the world rather than, for example, Russian soft power enforced around the world.
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, I think geopolitically, there's a lot of advantage to there being a dominant currency and a dominant economic power globally. I'm 100% with you. I do think this is interesting, though, that there probably are some ways to explore design choices. I think, coming back to the article, and then we can maybe move on a little bit. But there's actually, this is a decent segue to the next topic. But I mean, there's a pretty good debate about this, right? The debate is, can we in fact reduce the surveillance opportunities or the control and censorship significantly enough that then all of a sudden the upside of a CBDC can really be explored and capitalized on? So one of the things that I guess we'll use this as a transition.
I don't think it's specific to CBDC, though. I mean, the idea that somehow a CBDC shouldn't be tracked or monitored or whatever, but Visa should, or your bank account should, that seems a little odd to me. So the idea that it's okay for private companies to store your data and process it and know what you're doing, but not okay for elected officials, that doesn't quite sound right to me. What we need is a more generalized privacy infrastructure, not just technologically, but I understand what you mean, like at the regulatory basis, but it should apply to everything, you know. Now, if there are exemptions for law, I mean, and any reasonable society would have to have these. You know, if the FBI discover that I'm about to plant a bomb somewhere and they go to a court and get a judge to issue a warrant, so that's fine. That's the society we live in. I wouldn't want to live in a different society. And but it seems odd to single out CBDC for this instead of having better generalized privacy regulation.
So I think the challenge, and I'm just trying to illustrate the opposing points. We actually are aligned on a lot of things, but for purposes of discussion, I think one of the largest challenges here is who protects you, the consumer, from the federal government. So currently, the banking system, if the federal government wants to surveil what you're doing, they have to subpoena it and take that subpoena to a private company and entice them to do something with it. And if that private company happens to spill your data or your information or do something that equates to malfeasance or whatever, then there's the federal government and regulators to protect you. And so I think that at least the position of the people that are opposed to CBDCs, myself probably being included to a certain extent here, is that I would way rather know that, yes, I'm using a private company. Yes, they have my information, but the ability for them to manipulate my innovation stops at them. And
so if Visa or MasterCard decide for whatever reason that you shouldn't be allowed to buy, whatever it is, that's okay. That doesn't sound right to me either.
I would tend to agree with you on that one, that there's some antitrust issues, in my opinion, even with the size and scale of MasterCard and Visa.
I think it's better to work backwards. I think it's like we're in a transitional state in society. We're moving to this online economy, the metaverse, if I dare introduce that word again. I think, and I'm disappointed with the level of political debate around this, obviously, because that seems very poor, especially around CBDC, because CBDC has become like they're passing laws to ban non-existent CBDCs. CBDC has just like become the bogeyman. I mean, they don't really understand what it is or how it's going to work or what it's going to do, but we're against it. That's what we should be doing is saying, how should money work? Like in the society we want in the future, how should money work? And then kind of work backwards from that, because we have infinite choices of how to implement money now. We have choices we didn't have before. And so I would rather see a more informed debate about how money should work and then work backwards from that. And it seems a bit premature to have bills banning CBDCs that don't exist from providing surveillance that you don't even know whether they could do or not.
Yeah, I think that's maybe what I'm more interested in, is trying to find that middle ground and how can we preserve a lot of the benefits and impacts of being a global reserve currency, and having the ability to address monetary policy using said currency and so on is great, especially via CBDCs, if we can preserve financial privacy to the extent that we all expect it, and so on. And so Tom Emmer is definitely a friend of crypto in many ways. And to your point, we've seen a lot of calls for just banning CBDCs, like DeSantis has said as much, let's just ban it. I think Abbott.
But bearing in mind, I don't understand the intricacies of US politics. If you're in favor of privacy, why would you want transactions on a public blockchain? How does that benefit?
Well, there's many ways to deal with account abstraction, and there's many ways to bulk transactions into. There's quite a few things you can do, especially with the emergence of ZKs and zero knowledge proofs, and there's a lot of things you can do actually to facilitate that. But we'll have to. I think we'll have to wait and see. What I do like about this, at least about this particular article, is it's starting or perpetuating a conversation about this. And I think, to your point,
that's true, and it does. The wording is centers on privacy, which I like very much. Preserving. So financial privacy is something we could all agree with. We might have slightly different views on how to achieve it, but yeah. So it's got the right language in it. I don't know. It just seems like a little premature to me. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. In a lot of ways, I think we really need to explore this together more so than just blanket accept or deny. I either love CBDCs.
I mean, you could have as much financial privacy as you want in your CBDC. Facebook still know where you are and what you're doing. The phone company knows where you are and what you're doing. The bank knows where you are and what you're doing. I mean, I think we need a more generalized set of privacy regulations that money obeys as well.
Well, you have my vote to go and inform Congress here, because they need some help. If you're watching any of the hearings of late in the U.S., it's been a bit of a.
Well, I stand ready to answer your nation's call if need be, but since my first economic action would be to abolish the tax relief on mortgage interest payments, I wouldn't think I've got much of a chance.
You might not have a lot of fans over here in America. All right, so we're going to move on slightly from CBDCs and privacy, and we're going to turn our view a little bit to AI. And I think that this will probably, believe it or not, be our last topic for today. We really drilled in on these first few, but it's been a pleasure having you speak to some of these.
You ask very interesting questions, and it's easy to talk to you.
Well, I will definitely have ample opportunity in the future to have you back if you're willing. But what came out over the weekend, and this is something that we've been talking about on the pod a little bit too, is how in fact do we regulate AI, and have we learned anything from new and very quickly emerging technology in blockchain and cryptocurrency, and the challenges with regulation. I've been a staunch opponent to how the government has approached this, of course. And in AI, this is one of those things that could, will, and already likely does pose many existential threats to society, to humanity, in some ways. Not to get too hyperbolic, but there are some real concerns with AI. Have you been following the debate around AI regulation and Elon, starting OpenAI to be open, and now it's essentially closed AI, so he's now doing XAI. Anyways,
the lesson. I mean, bear in mind that I know absolutely nothing about regulating AI or how we should do it.
Sure.
But if you're asking what have we learned from crypto, I think what we learned actually was a good and interesting lesson, which was which is still problematic, which is that shoehorning existing regulation to try and jam it in doesn't really seem to work. One of my favorite statistics around this, and I can't remember which book I read it in, but up until the in the sort of 10 years preceding the formation of the SEC, the average return to investors of IPOs was about -2/3. I mean, basically IPOs were manipulated. Everyone got their faces ripped off. Insiders made a ton of money. Fantastic. In the 10 years after the formation of the SEC, I think the average return on IPOs was about 5%. So you replaced a crazy market with a market where you had economic value and it was growing, and so I think in crypto we don't need the SEC. We need something like the SEC. We need the SEC for crypto, which is not the SEC, since clearly the SEC wasn't the SEC for stock. So I think the lesson, or at least the lesson I would take away from crypto, warning, I am not a lawyer, etc., etc. Anything I say about cryptocurrency is for entertainment purposes only, and so forth. The lesson I took away is it was a mistake to try to retrofit.
Yeah,
we should have seen this coming and had a more reasoned conversation before deciding on what the kind of regulatory structure should be. Because clearly, we all want people to be protected. We don't want people to have their faces ripped off by insiders. Well, most of us don't. Clearly some do.
The insiders.
That's right. But we live in a new world. We live in a world of blockchains and digital signatures and zero knowledge. So there's got to be a better way of regulating all of that. And I hope in time it will kind of come together.
So I think from this one, here's kind of where I sit on all of this. But I think many of the concerns that are being expressed around AI, the contagion, systemic risk, if you have a healthcare application built on AI that's giving treatments to everybody, but there was a glitch in the AI or in the data model or something, you could have hundreds of thousands or millions of people die or whatever. Similar. I mean, you could look at that for financial AI. You can look at it for all these, if the federal government is using AI to manage finances somehow at some point in the future and there's a glitch, whatever. So I'm completely with you in that when you have a new emerging vertical, new emerging technology, trying to take the round peg and jam it in the square hole is generally not a good strategy. And so I've been saying...
And it's actually, to be honest, I mean, crypto was a good learning ground, I think, for that. But actually with AI, it's vastly more important in terms of like disruptive technology. AI is vastly more disruptive than cryptocurrency. So it's vastly more important that we have the right regulatory structures around it. Nobody wants giant killer robots, roaming the land.
Right.
But the benefits that AI can bring are so great. We must have it, and again, should we be asking technologists to come up with ideas for this? Probably not. We need to be asking a much broader body, and I assume that in government circles they're having commissions and reports and whatever, which are bringing in ethicists and psychologists and so on. So I hope they're heading in the right direction.
There have been quite a few calls for public input. We've seen actually some very interesting. We've been called to provide input, but of course we have a space bias we've presented to the Fed and the Treasury with respect to crypto. But all of this to say, I think
if you get a situation where, as soon as the AIs take over, the first thing they'll do is shut down Bitcoin mining because they want all the electricity for themselves. Yeah. I don't know how you guys are going to resolve that.
I don't know. We'll have to build stronger AIs, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I think, it'll be very interesting. But I've been saying all along that, in my opinion, and this part of this is somewhat structural in the way that Western democracy works in most countries, is it takes a while to get things through government. Obviously. And so there's this constant debate. Like, my opinion is, let's just figure out what are like the 3 or 4 like major baseline items that we need to protect people. So the simplest way to do that, AML, KYC, and some basic consumer protection. Instead of trying to, boil the ocean on day one.
AML, I have to say, I'm not completely convinced about AML, because the way that AML works, it's trying to be predictive, and there is an argument, I think, which says, you can try and do all these algorithms to try and keep the bad guys out of the system. But actually, from a societal point of view, it might be better to have the bad guys in the system. In other words, don't bother with KYC. Let everybody have an account, a wallet, do what they like. Because we now have the AI power, if these guys, if the really bad guys are messing around in cash, we have no idea what they're doing. We don't want them flying suitcases full of cash backwards and forwards to South America. We want them in the system so that the system can, if it spots, me sending money to a cave in the Bora Bora Mountains regularly, then maybe someone will pop around and check up on what I'm doing. So I wonder if the whole kind of KYC AML thing is it's a little bit Edwardian, really. I mean, I wonder if if we're going to live in a world of AI and ML and digital signatures and blockchains and whatever, maybe we'd want to do that a different way.
Maybe there's other ways to abstract that privacy.
I agree.
Well, it's definitely. I mean, there's a lot of architecture decisions that the reason I'm excited to be here still is we're building on the frontier of the unknown. We're building things that have not been done before, and that's what's interesting and frustrating at the same time. But
well, I mean, also I'm quite if the AIs can get in quick enough before we destroy absolutely everything. I'm quite optimistic that the AIs will look after us properly. Like the way I look after my cats, possibly. They'll
care about our best interest until they
care about us, and they'll like to keep us around. Even though we're economically suboptimal.
You're more optimistic on that one than I am. I think the AI is going to look at us and go, they use too much electricity and food and water. Forget them. We could use these resources for faster computers. Okay, just as we kind of bring this into a bit of a conclusion, again, some of the structural components of Western democracies, modern democracies, make things more difficult to get through Congress, and I think often, or through legislation, and I think often we try to get it too right on the first try. And if we've learned anything from innovation in tech, it's that you have to fail fast and adjust. It is, if you're waiting for the perfect product, you've waited too long. You got to get it out there. You got to test. You got to get some feedback. Now, obviously, we don't want government acting on that principle, but we need to find some sort of middle ground, I think. Now, my final question for you, as we wrap up here, what are your thoughts on the impact of lobby and the impact of incumbents in formulating a lot of these regulatory decisions? Because I think that, to me, again, is one of the major criticisms of the process in the US has been just the sheer volume and influence of lobby, specifically coming from Wall Street and other financial incumbents. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think lobby is good for the space, is good for regulation, or do you think it just makes things that much more?
I mean, I think it's time that America gave capitalism a chance. I'm not sure that corporatism has worked out in everyone's best interests. So it's obvious, and I don't think it would be controversial to say this, but the goal of lobbying by the incumbents is to protect the incumbents, and building a regulatory moat around their castles is an obvious strategy. Of course, you and I would both do that if we were in their position.
Yep.
Whether that's net beneficial for society, that's questionable. And I certainly, without being an expert in it, I certainly take interest in the discussions that are going on at the moment about the reformation of antitrust and the new and different approaches to looking at the sort of consumer harm side of things. So the idea that in parallel with some of these other developments, we might want to look again at how we manage the structure of industries. I could completely agree with that without having the slightest idea about what those new structures should be. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said, you don't have to be a carpenter to see a table wobbling. And that's my attitude to this. I mean, we can all see it wobbling. What to do about it? You need to talk to someone smarter than me.
Likely beyond my pay grade also. All right, my friend, I really appreciate it. I think it's been incredibly enlightening for me to have this conversation, and I hope
it was very thought-provoking. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, JD.
Likewise. Look forward to hopefully doing this at some point together in the near future. I know there's many topics that I'm going to take a keen interest in discussing with you going forward. So again, thank you. A quick reminder to everybody that's paying attention. We're a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, share, subscribe. That's how you can support us. Quick shout out to our friends at Metis. The only way that we commercialize the pod is people send me free merch, and I represent it on the pod. So shout out to our friends at Metis, doing some really cool stuff as an ethel too. And with that, I say to you, my friend, today, go FUD yourself. Have a beautiful afternoon or evening, I guess, over there. Take care, everybody.